Thanks, Mike. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you can see everything okay there. So we good there?
Yes.
All right, great. So welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be here. I want to talk about really leveraging when it comes to sales and marketing, specifically as an entrepreneur. It was something I struggled with for like almost a decade because just even like in an MBA school and some things, it's very fundamental and it's not. It's more ethereal and more not as pragmatic, I guess. And things are constantly changing, and really how we market and how we sell things has really evolved over the last decade as well. And so, really, for the purposes of what we're going to talk about today, there's a couple of questions that I think I really want to make sure that everybody can answer. And the first question, as an entrepreneur and as we're starting out, is really what's my most pressing goal that I need to be working on right now? Because there's 1,000 things as a startup, as you know, and you really need to ask that question. What is the most pressing thing in terms of the chance of me becoming successful that I need to focus on right now? And then the second thing is, really what's the most effective way to grow sales? Because there's 1,000 different sales books out there. There's 1,000 different seminars and webinars and so forth. And a lot of different, what may have worked for one company may not be the right tool or mechanism for the other company. And then the other question is like, what's, outbound versus inbound? I mean, maybe you are familiar with those terms. So some are really say outbound is the only way to go. Other people say outbound is really kind of outdated. It's very expensive. Inbound can be a good method. So what strategy should I really use from an entrepreneur's perspective? And then I think really most important when I really go over with my students is to really understand what we call the buyer's journey. And then really how do you build your sales machine from there? And we'll dive into that for a few minutes. So really what I want you guys to get out of this is that I want you to have some clarity and a really solid plan for moving forward when you come out of this, because a lot of times it's the reason why we're coming to these things. You want to figure out, okay, what's the game plan? And so I want to help give you some clarity on that. So what you should be thinking about on what you should be doing for the next 30, 60, 90 days or so forth. And I really want you to get excited because I think there's going to be some tools here that's going to be very helpful for you. And so we'll jump right into this. And so the first question that we ask, when I talk with the students is why do companies fail? I mean, what's the number one reason that's fundamentally why do companies fail? Because if we understand that, then we have to figure out how do we prevent that from happening, right? And really at the end of the day, you can have all these different theories and things about why things happen. But at the end of the day, it comes down that they just couldn't get traction. They just couldn't get enough sales to outpace the burn rate or the operational expense that they have as a company. It could be, you could say, okay, they ran out of capital or whatever, but at the end of the day, you can only raise so much capital. At some point, you have to start selling. At some point, you have to really start growing significantly. And so that's something that I really became passionate about to when I'm talking to entrepreneurs is that you can get bogged down with all the product development and things. And it's really, as entrepreneurs, we get really attached to those things. But man, if you really just don't get really passionate about how you're going to sell your product or your services and then do whatever it takes to make that happen and make sure you execute on that, then in the long run, it's not going to be a very good outcome for you. So when I ask the question, what is your pressing goal, right? And this kind of gets back to entrepreneurship 101. The pressing goal is that you got to make sure that you've got the product market fit to begin with, because if you don't have that, then it doesn't really matter how much effort you put into sales and marketing. If that product market fit's not there, it's just not going to fly, right? And so, a lot of people say, well, what does that really look like? What does the product market fit really look like? And it's really more of a kind of a feel, like for example, if you're finding that it's, you're trying to go out into the market and you're making all these efforts to try to sell into a certain niche or a certain market or whatever. And there's just a lot of effort to try to make something happen, or your sales cycle is like multi-months long just to get just a somewhat of a commitment, then you may not have that product market fit. On the flip side, if you're making some kind of product or whatever, and you can't seem to keep certain things in inventory because there's so much of a need for that, then that's a good sense that you probably have a pretty good product market fit. So it's more of a sense. And then unfortunately, there's not exact metrics you can look into that, but man, you got to make sure you've got that down. And what happens a lot of times is you may have this flash in the pan where you get a couple sales right out of the gate and you think this is it, and then you can't replicate it. And that kind of gets into the next thing you got to make sure when you're focusing on these things is that you've got to make sure it's got to be repeatable. You got to have a scalable growth model. If it's a situation where the deals only happen when the CEO is involved, all right, that's not scalable, right? So it's got to be something where you can scale up to where if you hire more salespeople or you put more marketing efforts into things, then the sales kind of follow along with that. So you've got to have a situation when you're looking at this as you're evaluating your company, do I have a product market fit? Is this something that when we apply these methodologies that we're about to talk about, is it repeatable? Is it scalable? And the last thing is can you scale the business overall? In other words, is it something that you can only work inside Louisville area, or is it something you can actually go outside of Louisville and go beyond and maybe even global or whatever, depending on what type of company you have? So those are the kind of things as an entrepreneur you got to be always looking at to see the business that I have, does it have these elements? And the most important thing, obviously, is do we have that product market fit to begin with? All right, so the thing that a lot of people do is they fall into this herd mentality when it comes to marketing and sales, and they fall in the herd mentality of doing what people have done in the past or what they've seen this done in the past. And that's going to be typically more the outbound methodologies. All right. And so maybe they came from a corporation, right? So like, when I came from GE Healthcare, we did a lot of outbound. Okay. And so, but you got to realize it's a multi-billion-dollar company. So there's a linear approach to how much money you spend and how much dollars you can generate in sales in return for that. Well, as a startup, that's not necessarily the most practical thing to do. Right. So the thing about outbound, and outbound is going to be things like, cold calling, billboards, radio ads, TV spots, email blast, things that matter, what we call more interruptive type marketing. Those things are far more expensive and costly typically than what we're going to talk about on the inbound side. And so the typical trap that most entrepreneurs fall into, specifically ones that don't really have much of a sales background, is they typically think about the whole sales and marketing component as more like a linear type of thing. So like, here's my product over here, and then customer buys it. All right. So there's nothing, all I got to do is get the product out there, customer's going to buy it. And, the challenge is that even when they realize that, okay, we got to put a process together because we got to have a sales process. Everybody's talking about a sales process, right? But the challenge is that it's oftentimes more what we call vendor centric. And what I mean by that is that this is how I want my customers to behave. So I'm going to have several steps in the process. I realize that it's not just going to be, I put a product out there and like a website and then the customer is going to buy it. I may have a process where I have like a website and I have a free trial, and then maybe I have a presentation, and then maybe there's some other steps. And then the customer buys it, right? And then you feel better about the fact that, okay, I got a sales process in place. But what we'll find is that when it's vendor centric, in other words, this is how I want the customer to behave, that typically doesn't work. And the question is, well, why doesn't it work? And that's really where a lot of entrepreneurs get stuck, is that they kind of follow the books, they follow the things. I say, I've got my sales process in place, but this is still not working. I'm still not making sales. Why doesn't this work? The simple reason is that the first thing is that people don't really buy products, right? They buy solutions to a problem. And so a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we get caught up into this, what we call the shiny objects and the things that we get real excited about. We get excited about our user interface or how our system integrates with these other things and how nice it works and so forth. But we don't really focus on, hey, what problem are we really solving? And that's really what the customers want to talk about. And so a lot of times, entrepreneurs get so caught up in more of the features and so forth, they really kind of miss really what they're really solving out there. And that kind of leads me to my second point, in the sense that, entrepreneurs are going to start two different types of solutions. You're either going to have something that's more like a pain pill, you're really directly solving a problem, or it's more of like a vitamin where it doesn't really solve a problem. It's more of a nice to have. Not to say, the vitamin is not something you can't grow. And I'm speaking anecdotally here. But if you're selling more of a pain pill where you're actually really stamping out a problem and there's really tangible benefits, obviously it's much easier and your sales cycle is going to be much shorter, much more compressed. So you always want to be thinking about really what is the problem that we're solving. And so to that point, if people are buying more solutions, then that leads us to our other big thing. And that is that people are going to constantly research, they're going to study, they're going to learn about how to solve that problem, right? And so this is what's really flipped this whole outbound marketing thing on its head, because no matter how much you do your outbound marketing, no matter how much even if you were to get in touch with somebody and you cold call them and you were to tell them about how great your product or service is, that alone is not going to close the deal, because what's going to happen is that they're going to research, they're going to compare, they're going to look at references, they're going to look at testimonials, they're going to look at other products out there where, 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't even an option, right? So that's the reason why we've got to learn about what is it about, how do we apply these methodologies about how people research, how they study, and how they learn about things? How can we use that to our advantage when it comes to the new way of people really buying products and services? And so That's the reason why really outbound selling is really not effective any longer. It cannot be the only thing that you do, because people just don't buy that way anymore. So the that leads us into the question, okay, so what's this inbound marketing thing? Let's talk about that. Chet Holmes really put together a really great pyramid that illustrates how people kind of go about buying things, or what's going on in the psychology in their mind. And so what this basically is showing is that, at any given moment, when you're going out into the market and you've picked your market, and let's just assume that you've got the right market, you've got the right niche that you're going after. There's about 3% that's actually currently in the market of buying what you have, like right now. Okay. So you obviously want to make sure you've got everything set up that's going to capture that small percentage. So you want to make sure you have your SEO obviously set up, your SEMs, your things where people are actually, when they're looking for that specific solution, it's there and ready for them to go buy it. When it comes to the next level of about 6 to 7%, these are people that may not be willing to buy right now, but they're actually open to the idea that, oh, this is what you have, or I'm definitely open to learning more about that. But you guys, if you go further down the ladder, you've got 30% of the market is not even thinking about at all what you're offering. It's not even in their mindset right now, right? But it doesn't mean that they can't be persuaded to go to your company or to your product eventually, but it's just not even in their mindset. They're not even aware there's even a problem that exists. And there's another 30% that really don't think that they need anything. It's just something that, again, it's just not even top of their mind. And then there's a 30% down there that says, I know I don't need that kind of stuff. That's just not the way we're going to do business. We don't really need that kind of thing. So it's just not ever going to be a possibility. So you basically have about 67% of the market to really sell to, that you got to start thinking about, how do we get to these layers here, right? So that really kind of goes into what is inbound versus outbound marketing. There's direct contrast, right? So when it comes to, like, if we look on the right side with outbound marketing, right, the marketer is focused on selling, right? They're working on trying to get people to adopt their product or service. When it comes to inbound marketing, the marketer is not selling directly, they're more educating. So it's what we call, sometimes inbound marketing is referred to as education-based marketing. So it's more of an education process. So the target market is learning more about the problem that you address. It's and you can do that through white papers and blogs and ebooks and things like that. And I'll talk about some tools about how you actually can do this. On the right-hand side, again, when it comes to outbound marketing, the marketer creates kind of a one-way communication. You see billboards or radio spots or television ads or banner ads or whatever. It's one-way communication. Whereas on inbound, the marketer is actually interacting with the audience. A lot of times you have conversations that are going back and forth through Facebook and things like that. Outbound, the bigger the budget, the bigger the success. Just like I said in GE, the more money that you spend, there's somewhat of a linear relationship in terms of the actual sales that's made. When it comes to inbound marketing, it comes all about content. It's more about how much valuable content you're providing, the amount of content, but also it has to be valuable. The bigger success it happens, kind of like on the back end down the road. And then outbound marketing is also synonymous with what's called interruptive marketing, where you're actually interrupting the customer to say, "Hey, I want you to get your attention. Here's what we offer." Right. So this is when it comes to cold calling. When it comes to, all of a sudden email comes in my email box or whatever, or I get some mail. That's all interruptive marketing versus inbound marketing. The customer is actually choosing to see the content from the marketer. They're actually researching and trying to figure out, what's going on out there to solve a problem that they have. Right. So that's the two big differences. And so now the question is, how do we use this stuff? So the first thing we have to, I'll give you just an example. I'm sure most of you have probably heard of HubSpot. HubSpot, actually, the founders were the ones who actually coined the phrase inbound. Okay. I think they actually trademarked it, believe it or not. So I came across HubSpot probably about 8-9 years ago. And this was when inbound was just starting to creep up. And the reason why I discovered it is because when I started going on all these websites, I was getting all these free white papers and ebooks and things. I'm like, wow, everybody's doing all these things. Why are they doing that? And so I went onto HubSpot's site, and they give me all these different templates and things to look at. They give me a lot of free ebooks and so forth. And as I would download these ebooks and read them, there was really good content. So I started downloading more. And so I said, this is very interesting. I said, it sounds like this company can really help me do this. And so I ended up talking to my admin, Stacy. I said, we ought to give these guys a call and learn more about what they do and maybe how they can help us. And so I kid you not, within half an hour after I had that conversation with her, she and I haven't had a chance to call them yet. They called us. One of the sales development reps called us, what we call SDRs. And she said, hey, Lance, there's a guy from HubSpot that's calling you. I'm like, really? I said, okay. So I picked up the phone, and no sooner than the guy introduced himself, I started pelting him with all these questions. I said, hey, John, I'm glad you called. I got this question about when it comes to blogging versus, Twitter feeds and Facebook, and how does all that interrelate? And he started, answering some questions. And I'm sure he's sitting back, thinking, this is the easiest cold call I've ever made in my life. Right. I mean, it wasn't like he had to interrupt me, basically, even though, I basically called him in the way it worked out. I mean, when he called me, I basically started interviewing him. So the thing is that I was so receptive. I was already warmed up to his, him calling me, because I'd already taken from him, from terms of content and so forth. So there's a psychological thing that goes on when you give to your audience, when you actually provide value to your audience first. Even if you do make cold calls or you do reach out, and it might be considered outbound, in a way it's really not, because you're basically, if you can monitor if they've been consuming your content. So when you do reach out to them, they're in a very receptive mode to engage with you. And so once it was very easy, because then I had all these questions, and he said, I need to set you up with, actually a salesperson. I'm just a sales development person. I'm like, what is that concept? And he said, well, basically I'm called as an SDR. All I do is just reach out to you and set up appointments for you to have a more in-depth discussion with the salesperson, because basically what the model is of being respectful of my time, and they want to make sure they can carve out enough time for us to really have an engaged discussion where we can advance more down the sales process. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. But that just immediately, once I got off the phone with him, I realized the power of, like, wow, if I can replicate the psychology and how this stuff works. I said, I just instantly got it. I said, this is pretty good stuff. And so over the years, what we started doing is really applying the methodologies of HubSpot. We did use HubSpot for a while in terms of a software, but it was pretty pricey. And obviously they were one of the first to market as a SaaS company. And there's other companies out there like, Infusionsoft or ClickFunnels, and there's various other ones out there that have come in the market that have driven the cost down. But my point being is that we were actually able to replicate this. We were able to actually start creating white papers and ebooks and things like that, and marketing to our target market. And we started getting thousands and thousands of downloads. And then we're able to actually, through the software, kind of figure out who is the most warm or who's the most receptive, then start to reach out to them from there, and became a very powerful methodology for us. Okay. So that's just a quick story about how personally I was able to, this is not really a theory for me. It was something I saw the tangible benefits from. So the big really aha moment, for us was that, hey, the secret to this whole long-term growth thing is that you've got to educate your target market. You have to be committed to doing that. You have to be willing to say, hey, we need to position ourselves as the expert in this market, because people buy from experts. People buy from people who they trust, people that they know what they're talking about. And so you just got to claim that crown, right? So you don't have to say, okay, I don't have 30 years of experience in X, Y, Z. You just have to claim that crown and just do your research, get really maniacally focused on becoming really knowledgeable in the industry that you're in. And then the product or service that you have, you need to make sure you actually develop content that surrounds that product, where that product can solve some of the problems that you're talking about on the peripheral. But you don't necessarily are writing white papers and things that are selling your product. You're selling, you're educating the market on the problems and how to make those improvements. And then eventually your product becomes, or service becomes, the logical conclusion to start heading in that direction. And so when people start to consume this content, they really start to think, hey, mobile fit or whatever is going to be the next logical thing that we want to talk to. All right. So a lot of people, they get like really overwhelmed. They get like, oh my gosh, I'm not a great writer. I'm not, going to be able to do all this. And you just have to, just start. Again, HubSpot has some great templates to where you can pick your medium and so forth. Some people go down the video route. Some people go down more the blog route. Some people go down like podcasting. You have to kind of pick, the medium where you think your target's going to be. And some of the thought process is that you want to kind of figure out where are what we call the watering holes. Where does your market go for information? All right. And so that's where you have to do a little bit of customer research, but you got to figure out where do they typically go? What kind of forums do they go to? What type of places do they go to consume information and so forth? So you can kind of get involved in contributing to those areas. And then obviously you can create your own content on your website, make sure you SEO out and pixelate it right. So you can make sure you be found on when people are searching. But those are things that there's plenty of people out there that can help you in that regard. And then there's even places like, it used to be called the Content Squad. I think it's called a Marketing Squad now, where people can actually do blogs for you. There's people who can write content for you if you don't want to do it yourself. We did it all ourselves, and it kind of was. We kind of developed a schedule, and then we just kind of worked in one piece at a time. And after a while, it just became really enjoyable. So it's not something that you just don't want to get overwhelmed with. You just want to start with one piece at a time and just kind of move from there. The thing I want to talk about for just a few minutes though, is just the importance, and this is what I talk about with my class, is just, understanding funnels and how that funnels really work when it comes to inbound marketing. And the thing about sales funnels is that that's really what equals predictable revenue. All right. Because if you can figure out how many people are kind of coming into your funnel, right, and then what that conversion rate is, and that's going to be, you can be able to predict, what that is. You can work backwards from there. And so there's two primary levels that you have to work with. You've got, all right, how can I get people in the top of our funnel, right? So whether we're using inbound marketing and maybe a little bit of outbound marketing in terms of, maybe you're advertising webinars or things like that, along with your inbound marketing where people are finding you and they're kind of coming in the top of your funnel. The next thing you want to look at is like, what do we have to do to kind of convert these people who are initially coming in the top out on the other side, which generates, revenue. And so those are your two primary levers. And you can either do one or both, or ideally if you can do both at the same time and really improve on both of those, that's when you're going to really drive it. So there's metrics you can look at. The key metrics could be, all right, I'm gonna look at how my campaigns are really driving traffic. How many visitors am I getting? What is that converting to? Number of trials, what that conversion is to close deals. Obviously I'm talking about maybe some type of online type of business where people are coming in through the funnel through your website, and then you may have a product or a software that people are going to try first before they end up buying, but it could be a product as well. So this is just to give you an example of one way you can measure and think about when you're looking at your funnels. The secondary metrics though, and this is what I think is the most important, is really understanding how much is it costing to get these customers, right? So even when you're doing inbound marketing, there is some cost involved with that. But if you're still having a combination of inbound and outbound, overall, you have to look at how much is it costing to get these customers. And you're going to be taking into account, how many marketing people you have, the salespeople, and, whatever type of campaign you're doing, email campaigns, whether you're subscribing to MailChimp or whatever, you have to overall look at what is it costing to get these customers in. And then you want to look at more of the lifetime value of how long they're staying with you. And if you have maybe a software as a service business and you're getting recurring revenue every month, how long do they stay with you before they churn out? And then, or if it's more of a product-based business, how many products do they renew or buy or whatever from you before that customer moves on? So, typically, you want to have your lifetime value, you want to have it to be at least 3 to 4 times what your customer acquisition cost is. If it's not, you probably don't have that great of a business model. So, it's really important. It may take you some time to kind of figure out what the lifetime value is, but you can get a pretty good idea what it costs to get that customer to begin with. So those are some things you really, as an entrepreneur, these are the things you want to kind of hammer out as soon as you can. And that also kind of gives you some ideas in terms of your product market fit. If your customer acquisition cost is really, really high, it's like, let's say you sell a product online for $60, right? But it costs you $240 to get that customer. That could be a problem. It depends on what the lifetime value is. I mean, maybe the initial cost you get back is, it costs you $240 for a $60 service, but the lifetime value, if it translates into, 180 or 360 or 400 and something dollars, then you might have something. But you have to look at overall what that customer acquisition cost is and be able to make sure you understand that really well. So the problem that happens with most entrepreneurs when it comes to this whole funnel management, because that is really going to be the lifeblood of your company, is to figure out how many people are we having coming in and what's coming on the other side, is that it gets clogged. And what happens is you tend to not have a problem getting a lot of suspects or prospects coming in the top of the funnel, but it gets choked and you can't get them to drop out on the other side. And the typical reason why this happens goes back to what I said at the very beginning of our conversation. And that is that you have more of a vendor-centric funnel design, right? And so what I mean by that is that vendor-centric is basically that you're hoping that customers are going to do something. They're going to follow a process that you've set up that they're not motivated to do. That's simply what's happening, right? So that's why it's important for you to really get inside your customer's head. And there's two factors that are pulling against you. You have what we call friction, all right? And then you have concerns that they have. Friction is how much effort is it going to take for that prospective person to actually experience your product or service or get access to it. And then what's all the concerns that are happening as a result of, buying your product or whatever. So what you're going to have to do is you have to offset that by redesigning kind of how you can motivate people to kind of get past some of that friction and or reduce as much friction as possible. So let me explain. That's the reason why it's very important to start thinking about what's called a buyer-centric funnel design versus a vendor-centric funnel design, right? And so buyer-centric is simply looking at how do these people buy things. Okay, so let's just walk through an example, like what we call the buyer's journey. People basically go through three phases. They go from an awareness phase about, hey, I think we got a problem here. We got to figure out how to fix this problem. Then they kind of go through a consideration phase of what are the solutions that we have to that we have at our disposal, and then then we make a decision to purchase and so forth, right? But depending on where you are and depending on where the buyer is in the buyer's journey, really depends on how you market to them. Okay. So for example, if that HubSpot guy was to call me before I even knew anything about HubSpot, I probably wouldn't have even taken this call. You follow me? Because I'm not even in a awareness stage of what's going on. Okay. So that's the reason by the time he got to me, I was already in the consideration stage. So my receptivity to him is totally different. Another example is if you've ever gone to a clothing store, right? And maybe at Oxmoor or whatever, and you're just browsing around. You might be with your spouse or whatever, and they're shopping elsewhere, and you're just kind of popping in this clothing store just to burn up some time. But you have no desire to buy anything right now. You're just kind of looking around. And then whammo, you get hit by one or two salespeople that start approaching you and say, hey, have you ever been here before? Hey, look over here. We've got all these things over here on this rack is on sale. And they become very annoying because I'm not in any kind of consideration or purchase phase, right? So I don't want to hear from a salesperson. Does that make sense? So I'm just in the awareness phase, but let's flip the script. Let's say that a friend of mine has an emergency where he needs me at a black tie event, maybe for a funeral or for, a wedding, or maybe one of his groomsmen got sick or whatever, but he needs me there and he needs me there tomorrow, right? I don't have a tux. So I go over to Macy's or go someplace and I'm finding the area where they have the men's rental clothing or whatever. And I can't find a salesperson in sight, right? And I'm very annoyed because at this point I'm in the purchase phase. I need a salesperson to help drive me over the finish line. So my point being is that depending on where you are in the buyer's journey will determine really what type of, sales or marketing that we're going to be doing. And so that's why it's so important to understand where that person is in the buyer's journey to see how we're going to match that up to our process, right? And so because if our process is out of alignment with what the buyers and how they buy things, you're not going to make any sales really happen. So, we have to be mindful of the fact that, if I have a moving company and I look for triggers, when people put their house up for sale or whatever, that's what I know that's going to be a good time where they're going to be more they're going to be going from more an awareness stage to maybe a consideration stage. If I just lost my data on my hard drive, I'm going to be looking for software for backup. So there are certain triggers that as a marketing person, I can think about what kind of triggers and where can I find people where I know those triggers are happening to where I can go to market to them, because I know they're going to go beyond the awareness stage. They're going to be more in a consideration or purchase phase. So as I said before, you have to map the buyer's journey and understand where they are. So on the top row here, this is the way this company buys things. They're going to research, they're going to have a short list of vendors, they're going to have an evaluation process, and then they're going to probably have some kind of ROI justification. Meanwhile, my company is trying to sell to this type of customer. This is the way we sell. We have a website, free trial, and we expect them to buy, right? You can see the mismatch here. We're not filling in the gaps of how they buy things. So there's two important questions that we have to ask ourselves. The first of which is, what are they thinking? What is the purchasing when the people are buying this? What are they thinking as they're going through their process, right? And then we have to then think, how are they going to react as they go through our funnel process, right? So that's the reason why we have to look at what are some things we can fill in. So we can look here that, hey, if they have a vendor short list, maybe we can help them out by go ahead and putting together like a competitive matrix, right? Or if they are trying to figure out an ROI, maybe we can build an ROI justification tool or some type of calculator that would really help them, not only for evaluating our product, but it could help them for evaluating other things as well. And so this ROI calculator is what's called engineering as marketing, to where you actually come up with technology and types of tools to really help your client or your prospect, make the purchasing decision. So this is just a little example of how, as an entrepreneur, you need to really, before you go all in on the marketing and so forth, you have to first understand how the buyer buys things, particularly with your target market. How are they buying things? And then we have to look at how can we align, our funnel management, our process, our sales process, along with how people buy things. And then we can fill that in. So let's take it one step further. So what I showed you before was just a basic, simple model, but this is actually more of a realistic process map of how someone would, that's a tech champion buying something, right? So, they could research possible solutions. They may hear about your product or service, by doing some research. Then they're going to want to, learn more about the company. They're going to want to see the product in action. They're going to want to see proof that it really works. And they're going to ask themselves internally, is this a problem that we really need to address right now? Is it really that urgent? If it's really not that urgent, we're going to put it on hold. If it is, they want to make sure that they're the best in class. And then they're going to go, and you can just follow along with the process here, right? They eventually have to get approval from legal, IT, and then end up, buying the product. So you, on the other hand, what you got to do is you've got to look at this and say, where can we help do this? So if they're researching possible solutions, we got to make sure we're applying the inbound marketing methodologies, whether we're doing SEO, which is free, SEM, which is what we pay for. We want to make sure that we're putting stuff out there that generates awareness that there is a problem to help people identify it. And then you can see all the things in yellow that we can do to make sure that we're checking the box. And if they want to see the product in action, we might want to have a good infomercial or some type of video that actually shows how the product works and so forth. So this is just showing you an example of how we did the exact same thing as this. I mean, we literally mapped out our process, and then that's what really helped us determine what kind of sales assets do we need to build, right? Instead of just kind of building stuff and just throwing it up on the wall and see what sticks, we actually had a purpose. We said, okay, these assets have a specific purpose in helping us drive through that buying process and have a better chance of winning on the other side. So that helped us really understand with little resources that we had, what assets do we really need to build? Some of them could actually be a pamphlet. Some of them could be more of a landing page. Some of them could be a video. Some of them could be like an Excel spreadsheet. It just depends on just by understanding what that buyer's journey was. Okay. So that's really, how you do that. So really the last thing I'll share with is, when it comes to, marketing, sales, inbound marketing, and so forth, is that your product, depending on what it is going to be the best salesperson for you. And so if there's a way, there's a lot of things you'll see out there where there's a lot, I mean, when it comes to software specifically, and I'm a software company, so that's kind of like what the mindset I think from. But you think about freemiums, free trials, and so forth. And so, if you can get someone to actually use your product for free for a little bit, and then that lowers your customer acquisition cost, because they can experience it and they'll find out really quickly if it's something for them or not. So you're not spending a lot of time, a lot of sales efforts on someone who really isn't interested in your product. But people who really do see a value and they're able to download it and kind of get a free trial or whatever, then that's can be a really, really good way of, getting your product out there and reducing your sales cycle. And that leads me to, as we go into closing, is that the more you can really kind of wow a customer earlier on in the sales process, the shorter your sales cycle is going to be and the higher success rate is going to be. So just an example, and again, this is coming if you're doing things online, if you're selling products online or selling services online, you want to kind of, define, these wow processes. And so you can have these little mini wows where people can like say, oh, that was kind of cool. Let me keep exploring what these guys have. You can have like a full wow where they're like, oh my gosh, I've got to buy this product like right now. So the question is, how do we get to that? How many steps does it take for a customer or a prospect to get to that big wow? How much time is it going to take? How much friction is it going to take for them to get there? And more often than not, many marketers make the mistake to where you have to like give out your credit card first, and you have to you have to do all these things before you get any kind of wow, or you have to experience the product for a while before you get the wow. And so there's a lot of friction involved. And so an example might be the conventional approach is you sign up for a free trial, you get a wow after that, and you convert the customer. But what if you figure out how to wow them up first? They really experience something that's like, this is amazing. Then they can sign up for the trial and they're already convinced, and then they convert to a customer. So that's just kind of thinking about when you're looking at your process, your funnel gets clogged, find out, am I wowing them right out of the gate? Is it taking too long to get to that wow? Maybe they never get to the wow because there's too much stuff in between for them to get to that wow. So you got to be constantly thinking about this and retweaking the process to see what happens and see what kind of results that you get back from that. Okay. So kind of wrapping this up here is, inbound is a great strategy to have. I think it's absolutely necessary for every company to do. And it's not a matter of if we should do this. It's like how much and what degree. It's not going to be one of those things that's going to, get you instant revenue right out of the gate. It's slow and steady. But once you build up your what I call inbound equity per se, it's a constant steady stream. So we're now benefiting, of customers constantly flowing in from work that we did 2 years ago, right? And it just kind of builds over time. So you have to think of it as more of a long-term approach. And there's times where it can pay off very quickly, depending on what kind of forum that you get on. I mean, you might get something that kind of gets shared and goes viral, but more often than not, it's going to be something you're going to build up over time. But it definitely needs to be part of your strategy, and you need to have a balance with that and understand that it can be very helpful for your outbound strategy as well. So another case in point of how I can actually reverse this is that, let's say that, I'm not having a lot of inbound, stuff coming in right now. And so I'm doing a lot of cold calling and outreach and so forth. And I'm talking to my customers, might do some email campaigns and things like that. And then what I may do is I may use my outbound resources in the interim, these assets that I've created, and I use those as a differentiator and a value build that I'm using in my outbound methodology. So case in point, if I'm doing more of an outbound email campaign, or maybe an outbound call campaign, when I reach that prospect, knowing what their challenges are, I can say, hey, during the course of the conversation, they say, yeah, we've been struggling with this XYZ. They say, you know what? We actually just finished an ebook on that I think would be very helpful for you on that, right? And so I can follow up and send that to you, right? And so now that person's saying, okay, this person is not just a salesperson. This guy's more of a consultative person that can really help me, or gal. And so that's where you can kind of start to use some of these assets to kind of show as that you have a lot of resources that you're bringing to the table. It establishes you more of an expert. And that's really what you want to do over time with your customers. Okay. So really, there's 2 resources that I would highly recommend, that I couldn't recommend highly enough. There's a guy named David Skock, and that's where I bought a lot of this content from, believe it or not, from forentrepreneurs.com. A phenomenal resource for you to go to. Everything from how to determine a product market fit, to understanding sales and marketing strategies, to business models and so forth. He's with a company called Matrix Partners, which is the venture capital firm, but they have really dedicated and really helping entrepreneurs with a lot of information. I think they have over 100 videos. It's almost like a free Udemy thing on entrepreneurship. So I would really highly recommend that. HubSpot, not necessarily recommending them for the software side of things. I think would be a great solution for you, but they offer a lot of free content in terms of if you're just now getting into inbound marketing, you need some templates. They even have a HubSpot University where you can take a course free course on getting certified in as an inbound marketer. So maybe you have a person that's working for you and you want to help build up your department in inbound marketing. This would be a place to go to. That's for free as well. So that's really kind of the high level on kind of like my experience in the whole sales and marketing journey. I've worked for, like I say, Fortune 100 companies as a business development guy, marketing person. And then I was telling Mike about 12 to 13 years, and I've worked as an entrepreneur for about the same amount of time for 12 to 13 years. And it's a whole different world. But the nice thing is that you see how the big company, I start to see now how these big companies are doing it. But it's just a different world when you have unlimited resources and unlimited human capital versus when you're out there by yourself. You've got to get, very resourceful, and it's very similar principles, but you just have to get laser focused on how you apply them. So with that said, I will wrap up, and then if we have any questions or whatever, I'd be happy to address. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lance. Any questions for Lance? Lance, I know one of my favorite slides from probably from the more elongated version of this is the different avenues of inbound marketing. The white papers, the videos, the blog posts. What have you been finding is the most critical, or maybe has the best ROI, or elaborate on that?
It really depends, because there's some companies that do really well with just blogging, and they're able to pull in a lot of people in the top of the funnel. There's other people who just focus primarily just on just one medium, like with YouTube, and they do phenomenally well with just creating videos just within YouTube. It kind of depends on the market that you're in. And it goes back to, like I said, where are the watering holes? Where do people go? Your target, you got to figure out where, you got to really get to know your customer base, right? You got to really get to know who your target market is. And the more you narrow it down into a niche, and you remember what I used to say in class, the riches are in the niches, right? Because if you go too broad, then you dilute, your marketing abilities. And so the more you can kind of niche it down and kind of figure out where are these people, where are the watering holes in terms of where are they going to get their information, is going to be really the type of medium that you used to do. With us, we dealt with a lot of CEOs and CFOs and the demographic that they're in. They're typically an older demographic, so there's not as much of them that were on YouTube and stuff like that. So we kind of focus more on the blog, on the blogs and the white papers and things like that. And it came across with the type of thing that we're selling. The white papers came across more scientific. And that's the thing, is that white papers are considered more like scientific. So if you're selling something that's a little bit more science-based or whatever, because ours was kind of more science-based, then white papers make more sense. And then ebooks are more like how-tos and things like that. And so if you're dealing with a niche market that really is trying to figure out how to do certain things, then that's how you kind of go about it. So,
in the age of short attention spans, you can obviously see a drastic change in video content. Even from the likes of TikTok, right? And how people are utilizing TikTok to make sales, utilizing those short video sessions. Any questions from the gallery before I keep going? Because I know I can ask plenty.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I guess I'll keep going. So what type of tech stack do you think is necessary if you're going to be producing all this content, and having people, you mentioned the HubSpot example. So obviously they had to have had some form of tracker, that you clicked on this white paper, you viewed it, you spent X number of time on it, meaning you actually went through it. Unless they just have the email window where it's like, in order to get it, input your email. What type of tech stack do you utilize? Or
Yeah, I
have?
mean, the nice thing about like a HubSpot or Infusionsoft or things like that is that they have these algorithms that it's kind of like a heat map that determines how much someone engages with your content. Kind of the more they go down that content workflow, obviously the hotter they are as a potential. And you can set up workflows to see what types of, if you have a multi-product service, what types of products are going to really be more honed in on. And so the nice thing about like with HubSpot is that you can do everything from like you design your website through them, and then you set up what we call your landing pages. Your landing pages, obviously, you initially capture the email because the ultimate goal of the entrepreneur is you want to build a list. You want to build, a contact database that you're going to own, because that way, as you build this list, you've got kind of a free permission to communicate with these prospects as long as you don't abuse that, right? That's really what one of the goals of inbound marketing is to do. Because otherwise, every time you try to communicate with a prospect, you have to go through Google AdWords or whatever. It's costing you to do that. So companies you've got SharpSpring, you've got HubSpot, you've got Infusionsoft. It depends. We kind of work backwards. We kind of did a hybrid. We did. We initially were using ClickFunnels, but there were some limitations there, and so we ended up just going through WordPress because I have technology people that work for me. So we kind of built our own in-house thing. But I'd say for an entrepreneur coming out of the gate, you really want to get, assuming that you don't have a tech support team, you definitely want to just go with a kind of a plug and play, like that. So, and who knows, HubSpot might be more affordable now, but I mean, it's not like, insurmountable. It's not like thousands of dollars a month. It's probably several $100s a month, but you definitely want, the thing I like about HubSpot or even Infusionsoft or some of the other ones is that the training that goes along with it. So it's not just the tools, the tech stack, it's about how do you use the tools. And so I think that's something you definitely want to take into consideration, and and you'll just kind of blossom out from there.
What percentage of your marketing spend do you think needs to go towards the inbound?
It's a great question, because I know like with us, we would fall into always fall into more of the product spend, and the marketing was always becomes not necessarily an afterthought, but we'd spend so much time kind of building out our product, and most of our spend would go into the product and never enough to go into the marketing. But I would just say, I don't know, I wouldn't say what percentage per se, but I would say that don't fall into the trap. I remember Steve Bing, he mentioned this. I met with him years ago. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but I met with him one time, and this was like 15 years ago. And he says, don't fall into the trap of just constantly improving your product, constantly building and building and building, and not putting not putting the amount of effort you should be putting on the sales and so forth. Because most time entrepreneurs are perfectionists in the sense of they fall in love with their product and they just go through this refinement process over and over and over again, and they never really give their product a fair shake or a fair chance, because by the time they burn through all their capital and they haven't really invested in the marketing they need to. But it needs to be substantial, but not to the point like that's the whole beautiful thing about inbound marketing, is that you can either buy your way into a market or you're doing more outbound, right? That's where you're spending a lot of money. The beautiful thing about inbound is that you're not spending a lot of money. It's more like, unless you want to pay someone to do the blogging and some of the content creation for you, or whatever. But for us, we just did it in house. Now there's opportunity costs that we're spending a lot of time making this content, but I never considered it that, because we got a pretty good ROI on that over a long period of time. So,
any other questions before I give them another one? All right, I'm gonna give my next one. So they say that with sales, you need somewhere between like 7 and 10 touches in order to really start to get them into your pipeline and engaged and motivated to buy, or part of the buyer's journey. Do you think that number is reduced because you are skipping that awareness stage that you mentioned? Do you think because you are getting them in that next stage that you're skipping 2 to 3 of those touches that they recommend?
I, short answer is, I really don't know. I mean, I think, from my own experience is that, first of all, the better the product market fit, it just fixes everything, right? If you're selling like this, complicated product or service that people can't wrap their minds around very easily, it takes a lot of education to get them, then, I mean, it doesn't matter how good your inbound marketing is or whatever, it's going to take a lot of touches and a lot of education and nudging to kind of get people to finally get the aha moment that, okay, I'm going from an awareness to consideration to actually, I need to purchase this. But to me, that's some of our products in the past, they've been like too complicated. And it was like, what exactly does it do? When people are asking those kind of questions, you're in big trouble, right? So I think the more you can just make sure you've got that product market fitting, it just fixes a lot of these problems. You don't have to get as concerned on how many touches it's going to take. If it takes a lot of touches, you probably have more of a deeper issue than just the marketing theory on how many you need to have versus how much inbound versus outbound, in my opinion.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, you could even, as those number of touches they recommend, you could just continue giving them more inbound. You tried this video, you might also like this one, or you might like this white paper.
And that's the kind of, that's what these softwares do. I mean, once you put your email address in the first time, whenever you go back and they also recommend another one, the email is already pre-populated, so they reduce the friction for you. So you can just keep clicking. Next thing you know, you've got 7 or 8 different ebooks because they're all going to be a great read. And that's what you want. You want them to kind of go deeper down that content hole with you. And it creates this, what we kind of call as quid pro quo, where the more content I consume from a vendor, the more I feel obligated to, if they ever do reach out to me, is to, entertain whatever they have to say. Because, I mean, to me, it's just morally balanced, if you will, to, hey, I've taken all this stuff from them. At least I can see what they have to say, kind of thing. But hopefully, if they've done their marketing right, their inbound marketing right, is that their things that I'm consuming is going to direct me eventually to come back to, hey, I need to see what these guys are doing. This is a problem that I have. Sound like they got some great solutions. Let me see what their solutions are out there. So,
yeah, I think what I remember even in the class when I was back in the MBA program, I saw the slide that you had posted where you filled in one of the gaps with the competitor slide.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, why are you putting the competitors in front of them? And it, just made me think. I think the answer, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that because you are creating the content, you control the narrative. You're controlling how those competition is being compared, and you can shine the light however you want to.
Well, I mean, that's what marketers do with every company, right? They know every feature and functionality of what their competition does, and really all marketing is that you accentuate what your strengths are, your competitive advantages are over your competition. What is going to be your unique selling proposition? What's going to separate you? And they're going to do the same thing about what their strengths are, right? But I think what it does, it creates a little bit a sense of credibility. And also it shows that, hey, I'm not afraid of the fact that there's competition out there. I mean, we got to talk about the pink elephant in the room. There's other people out here that can do what I'm telling you that I can do. But here's what makes me unique. But I'm also going to have these people in here, and here's some things that they're going to lack that I think that's separate. And here's my unique selling proposition that's going to really separate from me that. But that's what kind of gets into more of the sales aspect. When they get to that point, when they get to this consideration aspect, that's when you go in full on sales mode. That's when they're at the consideration point, there's no more inbound marketing, right? When they get to the consideration point, when they're evaluating competitors, now we go in full on sales mode. And that's when you want to hire the best salespeople you can to really get past those objections and get past what the competitors are able to do versus what you guys can do, and get the consumer or prospect to say, hey, the points that this guy's talking about is really what's most important to us. All these other things the competitors are saying that they think is important is really not the big issue. The salesperson has shown me and guided me down the path that, yeah, this makes sense. And they're going to buy from the guy that they trust and see as the expert and has their best interest at heart. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lance. I'm going to hit stop on the recording.